Look, ma'am, we know exactly why you're sitting here. Same little act every time. You roll in, take up a table, nurse one cup of tea, then wait for somebody to feel sorry for you. Officer, I paid for my tea. I'm only waiting for my ride. Your ride must be tired of you too, because nobody's coming. I'm a paying customer. I'm only asking to be treated fairly. No, you're making people uncomfortable, and I'm not asking you again to leave. Vance pressed his hand over her mouth. Everyone in Ruby's seemed to hold their breath. Darius Whitaker stood from his booth. Take your hand off her, Vance smirked. Sit down before you make your morning worse. Brent stepped closer, trying to be a hero. Tough guy. Darius didn't move. I'm trying to let an old woman breathe. Neither cop knew the quiet black man was a Navy SEAL, and Darius had no idea the woman they humiliated could change his life forever. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The old couch springs groaned as Darius Whitaker shifted his weight, trying to find a position that didn't make his left knee scream. The digital clock on the cable box glowed in the darkness. Sleep had abandoned him hours ago anyway. He pressed his palm against the knee, feeling the familiar heat radiating through the joint. The doctors at the VA had fancy words for it. Chronic inflammation from shrapnel fragments, too close to major nerves to remove safely. What they meant was simple. It would hurt every day for the rest of his life. The foreclosure notice sat on the coffee table like a sleeping snake. Darius had read it so many times he could recite the legal language by heart. Final notice of default. Property will be sold at public auction unless full payment is received. He had just a few days. The house felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Smaller somehow. When he was growing up, these walls had seemed to stretch forever. His mother's voice would carry from the kitchen to the back bedrooms, calling him and Renata for dinner. Now the silence pressed in from every corner. From down the hallway came the soft sound of Quincy mumbling in his sleep. The boy talked to himself in dreams, working through problems his young mind couldn't solve during the day. Last night, Darius had caught fragments about backpack straps and mean kids at school. Renata's breathing was deeper, steadier. She worked long shifts at the nursing home, helping elderly residents who reminded Darius of his mother in those final months. His sister deserved better than this couch arrangement, but the flood in their apartment complex had left them with nowhere else to go. Darius pushed himself upright, fighting back a grunt as his knee protested. The hardwood floor was cold against his bare feet. He moved carefully through the darkness, muscle memory guiding him around the furniture his mother had arranged decades ago. In the kitchen, he flicked on the small light over the stove. The coffee maker held enough grounds for 1 cup, maybe 2 if he stretched it thin. Renata would need caffeine more than he would. She had the day shift at the nursing home, then her evening classes to finish her LPN certification. Darius could survive on the bitter vending machine coffee at the security office. The refrigerator hummed and clicked. Inside, the shelves looked barren. A carton of milk with little time left, half a loaf of bread. Some leftover soup Renata had made stretch across 3 meals. The empty spaces seemed to mock him. Quincy's backpack sat on the kitchen counter where the boy had dropped it after school. One of the straps had torn away from the main compartment, leaving the zipper hanging at an awkward angle. Darius pulled out a roll of duct tape from the junk drawer and got to work. His mother used to say that broken things deserved fixing, not replacing. Make do with what you have, she'd tell him while mending clothes or patching holes in the porch screen. Waste not, want not. The duct tape wasn't pretty, but it would hold. Quincy wouldn't have to carry his books in a garbage bag like some of the other kids Darius had seen waiting for the school bus. He set the repaired backpack by the front door. Outside, South Harbor was still wrapped in darkness. Streetlights created small pools of yellow on the cracked sidewalks. Mrs. Alpha Green's house sat diagonal across the street, its porch light burning steadily. She always left it on, had since her husband died. Darius slipped on his jacket and stepped into the cool morning air. His breath formed small clouds as he crossed the street. Mrs. Green's mailbox was one of the old-fashioned kinds, metal-painted green with her house number stenciled in white. The paint was chipping now, but she kept the inside clean and dry. He pulled a $5 bill from his wallet, money he'd planned to use for lunch, and slipped it into an envelope with her name written in his careful handwriting. No note, no explanation, just enough for the bus fare to her doctor's appointment downtown. She'd never asked for help directly, but Darius had noticed her checking the bus schedule taped to her kitchen window. Pride was a luxury poor people couldn't always afford. But dignity was different. Mrs. Green had taught Sunday school for decades before arthritis bent her fingers too badly to write on the chalkboard. She'd fed half the neighborhood kids when their parents worked late shifts. She deserved to keep her dignity intact. Back inside his mother's house, Darius moved through his morning routine with military precision. Shower, teeth brushed, uniform pressed and ready from the night before. His security guard badge hung from a lanyard that had seen better days, but it was clean and positioned correctly. The dream felt farther away each morning. He'd sketched it out on notebook paper, a veterans community center in the empty lot where the hardware store used to stand, a place where guys like him could find work, talk through the hard stuff, maybe help younger veterans avoid the mistakes that led to sleeping on couches. The notebook was tucked in his dresser drawer, buried under bills and medical paperwork. Some dreams were too fragile to expose to daylight. A white envelope had been shoved under his front door sometime during the night. Darius recognized the expensive letterhead before he opened it. Whitmore Development Group again. Dear property owner. It began as if Victor Langston gave a care about property owners who weren't millionaires. We are pleased to extend our final relocation assistance offer for your property. Our cash offer represents a generous premium above current market value. Generous. The word tasted bitter in Darius's mouth. His mother had paid more than that for the house when South Harbor was just another working-class neighborhood instead of prime real estate waiting to be revitalized. The letter mentioned community improvement and economic development. It talked about bringing jobs and opportunity to South Harbor. What it didn't mention was what happened to the people who couldn't afford to live in the new South Harbor, where they were supposed to go when their neighborhoods became too expensive for the people who'd built them. Darius folded the foreclosure notice and slipped it into his jacket pocket next to his heart. His mother's photograph smiled at him from the mantel, surrounded by fake flowers that never needed water. I won't lose the house, Mama, he whispered. I promise. The morning shift change was visible from blocks away. Darius watched through the windshield of his beat-up Honda as nurses in scrubs hurried toward the hospital, their coffee cups steaming in the cool air. Night shift security was over, but his real day was just beginning. Ruby's Diner sat on the corner, its neon sign flickering between open and closed like it had for years. The building showed its age, peeling paint around the windows, and a front door that stuck in humid weather. But the food was honest, and the coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Darius counted the bills in his wallet twice before getting out of the car, enough for toast and black coffee if he was careful with the tip. His stomach had been growling, but eating was a luxury he couldn't afford until payday. The dinner bell above the door announced his arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt out of place with his mood. Every booth was occupied, filled with the usual morning crowd, nurses grabbing breakfast after night shifts, retirees stretching their Social Security checks over bottomless coffee cups, bus drivers on their breaks, and construction workers whose day started before sunrise. The air was thick with bacon grease and conversation. Someone was arguing about the local football team's chances this season. A woman near the window was showing off pictures of her granddaughter to anyone who would look. The normality of it all made Darius's chest tighten. These people had routines, comfortable lives, futures that extended beyond the next mortgage payment. Lila waved from behind the counter, her ponytail bouncing as she moved between the coffee pots and the grill. She was young, with the kind of smile that made customers feel welcome, even when they could only afford the cheapest items on the menu. Morning, Darius, she called over the noise. Counter or booth today? Counter's fine. He slid onto one of the red vinyl stools. The padding was thin, but it put him in position to see the whole restaurant. Coffee to start. Coffee and wheat toast dry. He pulled his phone from his pocket and set it face up on the counter. The screen remained stubbornly blank. His commander had promised to call about the security contract out of state. Months of work, good pay, enough to catch up on the mortgage and maybe put some money aside. The catch was simple. He'd have to leave South Harbor, leave Renata and Quincy, leave the house his mother had died in. Lila poured his coffee without comment. She'd seen enough working people to recognize when someone was counting every penny. The toast came up golden brown, and she didn't charge extra for the small pat of butter she slipped onto the plate. Across the diner near the window booth sat an elderly black woman in a wheelchair. Her silver hair was neatly combed, and she wore a plain cardigan that had seen many washings but was clean and pressed. A small purse sat in her lap, and she kept checking an old flip phone with growing concern. The woman, Mrs. Vivian Langford, according to the name Lila had called when she'd arrived, had ordered tea and a biscuit. Now she was looking around the diner with the patient expression of someone accustomed to waiting. "Excuse me, dear," Mrs. Langford said to Lila as she passed with the coffee pot. Her voice was soft but clear, with the careful diction of someone who had been educated to speak properly. "Would it be possible to charge my phone? My ride seems to be running late and the battery died." Lila glanced toward the manager's office. "Of course, Mrs. Langford. There's an outlet right behind you." "Thank you. You're very kind." The manager emerged from his office, straightening his tie and smoothing down his thinning hair. His face wore the expression of a man trying to solve a problem he didn't want to deal with. He approached Lila at the coffee station, speaking in low tones. "How long has she been here?" he asked, nodding toward Mrs. Langford. "She ordered tea, and the police were here yesterday, warned all the businesses about loiterers hanging around before the investor tour, said we need to keep the area looking right." Lila's smile faded. "She's not loitering, Mr. Denning. She's a paying customer waiting for her ride. I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong. I'm just saying we need to be careful. These investors are looking at the whole district. We can't afford to lose business." Darius's phone buzzed once, then went silent. A text message. Not the call he'd been waiting for. He checked the screen and felt his stomach drop. Delayed. "We'll call later." Another day of waiting. Another day of uncertainty. Another day closer to losing everything. The dinner bell jingled again as the front door opened. 2 police officers entered, their uniforms crisp and their expressions predatory. Officer Vance Harlan led the way, a thick-set white man with the kind of mustache that belonged in old westerns. His partner, Officer Brent Sykes, was younger and leaner, with cold blue eyes that swept the diner like he was cataloging threats. Conversations quieted as they passed. Even the retirees looked down at their coffee cups. Harlan's gaze fixed on Mrs. Langford immediately. He nudged Sykes and jerked his head in her direction. They approached her table with the slow, deliberate steps of men who expected to be obeyed without question. Officer Harlan stopped beside Mrs. Langford's table, his bulk casting a shadow across her teacup. "Ma'am, I need to ask why you're here bothering paying customers." Mrs. Langford reached into her small purse with trembling fingers and pulled out a crumpled receipt. "I paid for my tea, officer." "Here's my receipt." Harlan barely glanced at the paper before snatching it from her hand. "This doesn't prove anything. Could be from yesterday. Could be fake." He crumpled the receipt and dropped it on the floor beside her wheelchair. "We've had complaints about panhandling in this area. People bothering customers, asking for handouts." "I haven't asked anyone for anything," Mrs. Langford said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm waiting for my transportation." Officer Sykes had moved silently around the table. Now he stood directly behind her wheelchair, his presence blocking any path to the door. His hand rested casually on his radio, fingers drumming against the plastic casing. "Transportation, huh?" Sykes said with a smirk. "What kind of transportation?" "The kind that picks up people who can't pay their bills." "I told you I paid for my tea." Mrs. Langford's voice carried decades of dignity, but Darius could see the fear creeping into her eyes. "I have every right to sit here." Lila appeared at the table with the coffee pot, her face flushed with anger. "Officers, Mrs. Langford is telling the truth. She ordered tea and a biscuit. She paid cash. I served her myself." Harlan turned his cold stare on the young waitress. "Miss, I need you to step away from this table right now. This is police business." "But she didn't do anything wrong. Step away now." Harlan's voice carried the weight of authority and barely controlled violence. "Before you make this situation worse for everyone," Lila looked toward the manager's office, hoping for support that never came. The manager had retreated behind his desk, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with everyone in the diner. His silence spoke louder than words. He was afraid of losing his lease, afraid of police retaliation, afraid of standing up for what was right. Mrs. Langford tried to turn her wheelchair around, but Sykes's body blocked her movement. Excuse me, officer. I'd like to leave now." "Nobody said you could leave yet," Sykes said, his grin widening. "We're still investigating complaints about disturbances." "What disturbances?" Mrs. Langford's voice rose, carrying across the suddenly quiet diner. "I've been sitting here peacefully, bothering no one. I have rights. This is America." "Ma'am, you need to keep your voice down." Harlan said, stepping closer to her chair. You're creating exactly the kind of scene we're trying to prevent. I will not keep my voice down. I am a citizen, and Harlan's hand moved swiftly, covering Mrs. Langford's mouth with his palm. Her eyes went wide with shock and terror as his thick fingers pressed against her lips. There we go, Harlan said in a mockingly gentle tone. Nice and calm. We're just trying to keep you from getting yourself into more trouble. Sykes's laughter cut through the stunned silence of the diner. That's better. See how quiet things get when people cooperate? He leaned down closer to Mrs. Langford's ear. Nobody's coming to save you, lady, so you might as well make this easy on yourself. The entire diner had fallen silent, except for the hiss of the coffee machine and the distant sound of traffic outside. Customers stared into their plates or out the windows, anywhere but at the scene unfolding near the front booth. The elderly man at the counter gripped his coffee cup so tightly his knuckles had gone white. A mother with 2 small children hurried them toward the back exit. Darius's phone erupted into sound, its ringtone cutting through the tension like a knife. His commander's name flashed on the screen, the call he'd been waiting for, the job that could save his house, his future, everything he'd been fighting to hold on to. But when he looked up from the phone, he saw Mrs. Langford's eyes above Harlan's hand. They weren't just afraid anymore. They were pleading, desperate, filled with the kind of terror that came from realizing you were completely alone in a world that had forgotten your worth. Darius's finger hovered over the answer button. Months of work, good pay, a chance to start over. Instead, he let the call go to voicemail and stood up. The legs of his stool scraped against the linoleum floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Every head in the diner turned toward him. Harlan's eyes narrowed as they fixed on this new threat. Sir, I'm going to need you to sit back down, Harlan said, his hand still covering Mrs. Langford's mouth. This doesn't concern you. Darius remained standing, his military posture unmistakable, even in civilian clothes. Yes, it does. Sykes moved away from Mrs. Langford's wheelchair, his hand dropping to his belt where his radio and other equipment hung. You heard him. Sit down before you make this worse. I'm not sitting down. Sykes's face flushed red. You think you're tough, old man? You think this is your business? Without warning, Sykes shoved Darius hard in the chest with both hands. The force sent Darius stumbling backward into an empty table. Coffee cups crashed to the floor, plates shattered against the linoleum, and silverware scattered in every direction. Someone screamed. A child started crying. Darius caught himself against the wall, his injured knee screaming in protest. For a moment, every instinct from his military training urged him to respond with overwhelming force. Sykes was young, overconfident, and had just made the mistake of putting his hands on a trained killer. But Darius had learned control in places where control meant the difference between life and death. He steadied himself, pushed off from the wall, and looked directly into Harlan's eyes. Take your hand off her mouth now. The diner held its breath. Coffee still dripped from the overturned table onto the cracked linoleum floor. Broken plates lay scattered like puzzle pieces around Darius's feet, but he moved forward anyway, stepping carefully through the debris until he stood between Mrs. Langford and the 2 officers. Darius kept his hands open at his sides, palms visible, but his body carried the coiled readiness of someone who had survived combat in places most people couldn't imagine. His voice remained steady, controlled. Ma'am, are you hurt? Mrs. Langford shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks where Harlan's fingers had pressed against her skin. Sir, you need to step back right now, Harlan said, finally removing his hand from Mrs. Langford's mouth. You're interfering with police business. This isn't police business, Darius replied. This is 2 grown men terrorizing an elderly woman who paid for her tea and has done nothing wrong. Sykes's face had turned purple with rage. You just assaulted a police officer by resisting lawful commands. I haven't touched either of you yet. Sykes's hand moved to his baton, fingers wrapping around the black composite handle. But you're about to learn what happens when you play hero. The baton came up fast, cutting through the air toward Darius's jaw. But Sykes was angry, sloppy, telegraphing his movements like an amateur. Darius had fought trained killers. He saw the swing coming from the moment Sykes's shoulder shifted. The baton cracked across Darius's jaw with a sound like wood splitting. Pain exploded through his skull, and he staggered sideways, blood filling his mouth. But he didn't fall. Couldn't fall. Not with Mrs. Langford behind him. Lila screamed from somewhere behind the counter. Harlan moved while Darius was still reeling from the baton strike. The officer grabbed Darius from behind, wrapping thick arms around his chest and driving him backward into the nearest booth. The vinyl seat split under their combined weight. The table cracked down the middle, but Harlan had made a mistake. He'd grabbed Darius like he was restraining some drunk weekend warrior, not someone who had been trained to escape from enemy captivity. Darius dropped his weight, pivoted his hip, and drove his elbow back into Harlan's solar plexus. The officer's grip loosened just enough. Darius spun around, caught Sykes's wrist as the younger officer swung the baton again, and twisted. Sykes screamed as the weapon clattered across the floor. In one fluid motion, Darius pivoted Sykes around and pressed him face first against the lunch counter, controlling his arm without breaking it. "I don't want to hurt you," Darius said, breathing hard, "but I won't let you hurt her." Sykes thrashed against the counter, knocking over salt shakers and sugar dispensers. "Get off me! Get off me!" Harlan charged like a linebacker, lowering his shoulder and driving Darius away from his partner. They crashed through an empty table, wood and metal exploding around them. Something sharp carved a line across Darius's eyebrow. Blood ran into his left eye, turning half the world red. They rolled across the floor, scattering more debris. Harlan was bigger, heavier, and had the advantage of protective gear under his uniform. He landed punch after punch into Darius's ribs, each blow driving the air from his lungs. But Darius had learned long ago that taking damage wasn't the same as losing. He absorbed the punishment, protected his head, and waited for his opening. When it came, Harlan pulling back for a haymaker punch, Darius caught the officer's arm and rolled him over. Around them, the diner had erupted into chaos. Most customers had fled, but Lila stood behind the counter with her phone raised, recording everything. Her hands shook, but she kept the camera steady. "Please stop!" Mrs. Langford called out, her voice breaking. "Please, somebody make them stop!" Sykes had recovered his balance and was reaching for something on his belt. Darius saw the movement in his peripheral vision and made a choice that would haunt him later. He left himself open to another punch from Harlan, took the blow across his already cut eyebrow, and lunged toward Sykes. The tackle sent both men crashing into the pie display case. Glass exploded everywhere, mixing with the blood on the floor. Sykes's head bounced off the counter with a hollow thud, and he dropped to one knee, dazed. Harlan was on Darius's back again, one arm around his throat, trying for a chokehold, but the angle was wrong, and Darius had been choked by professionals. He drove backward into the wall, crushing Harlan between his body and the painted cinder blocks. Once, twice, until the officer's grip loosened. Darius spun around, blood streaming from his eyebrow and the corner of his mouth. His ribs screamed with each breath, and his injured knee felt like it might buckle. But he was still standing, still between Mrs. Langford and the officers who had put their hands on her. Mrs. Langford's fingers found the small pendant hidden beneath her cardigan. She pressed it once, twice, her hand shaking so badly she could barely manage the simple action. Outside, tires screeched against asphalt. A black SUV skidded to a stop in front of the diner, and car doors slammed. The front door burst open, and a sharply dressed black woman in her 50s strode into the wreckage of Ruby's diner, followed by two men in dark suits who looked like they could bench press police cars. "Mrs. Langford," the woman called out, her voice cutting through the chaos with professional authority. "Are you hurt?" The paramedic's hands were gentle, but thorough, as she cleaned the blood from Darius's split eyebrow. He sat on the back bumper of the ambulance, wincing every time she touched the tender skin around the cut. "You're going to need stitches. This one's deep." Darius nodded, watching the controlled chaos outside Ruby's diner. The entire block had been transformed. Police cars lined the street with their red and blue lights painting the early morning in alternating colors. Crime scene tape fluttered in the harbor breeze. News vans were already arriving. But what drew his attention was the scene near Mrs. Langford's wheelchair. The woman who had entered the diner, Denise Holloway, he'd learned, moved between witnesses with the precision of someone accustomed to gathering facts under pressure. She handed business cards to Lila, to the bus driver who'd stayed to give his statement, to the elderly man who'd watched everything from the corner booth. Two men in expensive suits flanked Mrs. Langford's wheelchair like human shields. They weren't police officers. They weren't EMTs. They were private security, and they carried themselves like professionals who took their jobs seriously. Officers Harlan and Sykes stood beside their patrol car, no longer swaggering or confident. Sykes held an ice pack against the back of his head where he'd hit the counter. Harlan's uniform shirt was torn, and his face had gone pale when Denise introduced herself. "Ma'am?" Harlan had stammered. "We had no idea. I mean, she looked like we were responding to a complaint about an elderly black woman sitting quietly in a diner, drinking tea she'd paid for, waiting for her ride." The paramedic finished with Darius's eyebrow and moved to examine his ribs. Each breath still hurt, but nothing felt broken. He'd survived worse, though that didn't make the aching any easier to ignore. Mrs. Langford's wheelchair approached the ambulance. Up close, without the fear and chaos of the diner fight, Darius could see her more clearly. Her eyes held intelligence and a kind of watchful sadness that reminded him of veterans who'd seen too much. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "I'll live." Darius tested his jaw, grateful it still moved properly. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, thanks to you." She studied his face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people quickly. "My attorney tells me you're Darius Whitaker, former Navy SEAL." "Yes, ma'am. I'm Vivian Langford." She waited, as if expecting recognition. Darius shook his head apologetically. "Should I know that name?" For the first time since he'd met her, Mrs. Langford smiled. It transformed her entire face, erasing years of careful guardedness. "Most people don't. I prefer it that way." Denise approached with a tablet in her hands. "Mrs. Langford, the officers are claiming they were responding to a panhandling complaint. The manager says someone called about a disturbance, but he can't produce any documentation. The waitress has video of the entire incident on her phone." "Good." Mrs. Langford's voice carried quiet authority. "Make sure she gets copies before anyone suggests the footage might disappear." "Ma'am, I don't understand what's happening here. Officer Harlan and his partner just tried to arrest the founder and CEO of Langford Mobility Systems," Denise explained, her tone carrying barely contained satisfaction. "One of the largest medical technology companies in the Southeast. Mrs. Langford is worth a fortune." The words hit Darius like cold water. He stared at Mrs. Langford, trying to reconcile the woman in the plain cardigan with what he'd just heard. "I came to South Harbor quietly," Vivian said, watching his reaction. "No security detail, no assistance, no jewelry, or obvious signs of wealth. I'd heard rumors that elderly residents, disabled people, and black families were being harassed by police before some kind of redevelopment deal. I wanted to see the truth for myself." "And you found it?" Darius said quietly. "I found more than I expected." Her eyes held his. "I found someone willing to risk everything to protect a stranger he believed had nothing." The paramedic finished her examination and packed up her equipment. "You should see a doctor if those ribs keep hurting," she told Darius, "and change the bandage on that cut." As she walked away, Vivian moved her wheelchair closer. "Mr. Whitaker, may I ask you something personal?" "Yes, ma'am." "What will this cost you?" Darius's laugh held no humor. "Probably everything. The officers will file charges. I'll lose my security license. There was a job opportunity out of state, good pay, but they won't hire someone with assault charges pending." He touched the bandage over his eyebrow. "I've got to make a payment on my mother's house, or lose it to foreclosure. You knew all that when you stood up." "Yes, ma'am." Vivian was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Around them, the controlled chaos continued. Police radios crackled. Witnesses gave statements. "Mr. Whitaker," Vivian said finally, "I'd like to offer you a job." Darius's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. "Ma'am, I've been planning something called the Langford Dignity Project. Community protection services for seniors, disabled residents, veterans, and families facing displacement. I need someone to lead it. Someone who understands what it means to protect people who can't protect themselves." The words seemed to float in the air between them. Too good to be real. Darius had learned long ago to be suspicious of offers that sounded like miracles. "I don't understand," he said carefully. "The pay would be enough to save your home and support your family, full medical coverage, authority to hire a team of veterans and community advocates, resources to actually make a difference." Darius's phone buzzed again. This time he pulled it out and glanced at the screen. The text message made his blood turn cold. "Renata, 2 police officers outside the house. They're asking for you." "What do I tell them?" Vivian noticed his expression change. "What is it?" He showed her the message. "It's starting already." "Then we'd better move quickly." Vivian's voice carried the steel of someone accustomed to making decisions under pressure. Will you help me expose what's really happening in South Harbor? Mr. Whitaker, will you help me turn this into something that protects people, instead of just punishing the guilty? Darius looked down at his phone, then back at the woman who had just offered him hope, disguised as employment. Hours ago, he'd been nobody special, a broke veteran trying to save his mother's house. Now he was bleeding outside a diner, facing charges, and being offered a chance to matter again by one of the richest women around. His ribs ached with every breath. His eyebrow throbbed under its bandage. His phone buzzed with another message from Renata, probably more urgent than the first. But when he looked at Vivian Langford, he saw the same thing he'd seen in the diner, someone who needed protection, even if she could hire an army to provide it. Yes, ma'am, he said. I'll help you. Darius's knee burned with each step as he turned onto his street. The morning sun cast long shadows between the old oak trees that lined his block, their Spanish moss swaying in the harbor breeze like gray curtains. The familiar sight of his mother's house, white clapboard siding, blue shutters, the porch swing where she used to shell peas, should have brought comfort. Instead, his chest tightened when he saw the patrol car parked at the curb. Officers Harlan and Sykes stood near his front steps. Even from a distance, Darius could see the evidence of their earlier confrontation. Harlan's left cheek had swollen, and Sykes kept his right wrist pressed close to his body, trying to hide the way it trembled. Renata stood on the porch in her scrubs, still wearing the ID badge from her shift at the nursing home. Her arms were crossed tight across her chest, and every line of her body screamed tension. Behind her, barely visible in the doorway, Quincy peered around the screen door with wide, frightened eyes. Darius forced himself to walk normally, despite the fire in his ribs. He kept his hands loose at his sides and his face carefully neutral. These next few minutes would determine whether his morning act of courage became his family's destruction. There he is, Sykes said as Darius approached. His voice carried the false cheer of a man trying to sound confident while nursing injuries. The hero himself. Harlan turned, and Darius got his first clear look at the damage. The officer's face was a canvas of purple and red, his left eye nearly swollen shut, but his remaining good eye burned with the kind of rage that promised retribution. Darius Whitaker, Harlan said, his words slightly slurred by swollen lips. We need to have a conversation. Good morning, officers. Darius stopped at the bottom of his porch steps, careful to keep distance between them. Is there something I can help you with? Help? Sykes laughed, a harsh sound that made Quincy flinch behind the screen door. You've done enough helping for one day. Renata's knuckles had gone white where she gripped her arms. Darius could see the fear in her eyes, not fear of him, but fear for him. She knew, just as he did, that this moment balanced on a knife's edge. We're here to inform you, Harlan said, pulling out a small notebook with his uninjured hand. The charges are being filed in connection with the incident at Ruby's diner this morning. Assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, disturbing the peace. The words hit Darius like physical blows, but he kept his expression steady. I see. You attacked 2 sworn officers who were conducting official police business, Sykes added, his voice rising with indignation. Unprovoked assault on men trying to maintain public safety. Darius thought of Vivian's terrified eyes when Harlan covered her mouth. He thought of Sykes's laughter echoing through the diner. He thought of Lila's shaking hands as she tried to defend an elderly woman who'd done nothing wrong except exist in a space where she wasn't wanted. I understand you have your version of events, Darius said carefully. Our version. Harlan's swollen face twisted into something resembling a smile. Son, we're the law. Our version is the only version that matters. Behind them, Quincy pressed closer to the screen door. The boy's presence reminded Darius of everything he stood to lose. Not just the house, not just his own future, but the safety of the only family he had left. The thing is, Sykes said, taking a step closer, charges like these have a way of affecting a man's life. Employment prospects, professional licenses, housing applications. He paused meaningfully. Military benefits. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Darius felt his hands clench involuntarily, then forced them to relax. This was the trap. This was how they turned victims into criminals, by making them react. You seem like a smart man, Harlan continued, dabbing at his split lip with a tissue. smart enough to understand that heroes sometimes lose things, important things. Renata made a small choked sound. Darius glanced up at her and saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She was thinking about Quincy's school, about their temporary stability, about how quickly everything could disappear. "Are you threatening me, officers?" Darius asked quietly. "Threatening?" Sykes's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "We're just explaining reality. Actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences affect more than just the person who made the choice." His gaze shifted deliberately to Quincy, then back to Darius. The message couldn't have been clearer if he'd written it in block letters. Darius felt something cold settle in his stomach. These men weren't just angry about their injuries or their public humiliation. They were angry that someone like him had dared to challenge their authority. They intended to make sure he remembered his place. "We'll be in touch about the court date," Harlan said, closing his notebook with a snap. "Until then, I'd recommend keeping a low profile, staying out of situations that might be misinterpreted." The officers walked back to their patrol car with deliberate slowness, letting their presence linger like a bad smell. Sykes paused with his hand on the passenger door. "Oh, and Whitaker," he called across the yard. "You might want to let your family know that this kind of publicity doesn't always stay local. News travels fast these days. Employers talk to each other." They drove away, leaving Darius standing in his front yard with the taste of blood still in his mouth and the weight of consequences settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Renata waited until the patrol car disappeared around the corner before she spoke. When she did, her voice cracked like breaking glass. "Darius, what have you done?" He climbed the porch steps slowly, each movement sending fresh pain through his injured ribs. Quincy backed away from the screen door as he approached, eyes still wide with confusion and fear. Inside the house, Renata collapsed into the kitchen chair. She buried her face in her hands, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "They're going to destroy us," she whispered through her fingers. "You know that, right? They're going to take everything." Darius sat across from her at the scarred wooden table his mother had bought at a church sale. The foreclosure notice still lay where he'd left it, but now it was joined by something else. Vivian Langford's business card, elegant and cream-colored with raised lettering that spoke of serious money. "Renata," he said gently, "you didn't see what they were doing to her." She looked up and her eyes blazed with a mixture of love and fury that only a sister could achieve. "I don't care what they were doing to her. I care about Quincy. I care about this roof over our heads. I care about you not ending up dead or in prison because you can't walk away from a fight that isn't yours. She's elderly, disabled. They covered her mouth to keep her quiet, and now they're going to cover our mouths by destroying our lives." Renata slammed her hand on the table, making the foreclosure notice jump. "Darius, we're days away from being homeless, and you picked a fight with 2 police officers." The words hung between them like an accusation. Darius touched the bandage over his eyebrow, feeling the throb of his injuries and the deeper ache of knowing she was right. His phone buzzed and he pulled it from his pocket with a sense of impending doom. The caller ID showed the out-of-state company that had offered him salvation. "Mr. Whitaker, this is from Meridian Security. We've received some concerning information about an incident involving you and local law enforcement this morning." Darius closed his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. I'm afraid we'll need to put your application under review pending the resolution of any legal matters. We'll contact you once the situation is clarified." The line went dead. Darius set the phone on the table next to the foreclosure notice and Vivian's business card, 3 pieces of paper that represented the crossroads of his entire life. Renata stared at him across the table, her face wet with tears and etched with exhaustion. "How much?" she asked quietly. "How much is your conscience worth? Because I need to know if it's worth more than Quincy's future." Darius reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the morning warmth, and they trembled in his grip. "I couldn't walk away," he said simply. "If it had been you in that wheelchair, if it had been Quincy they were silencing, I would have wanted someone to stand up." Renata squeezed his hand, and for a moment the kitchen was silent, except for the tick of their mother's clock and the distant sound of harbor gulls crying over the water. Between them on the table lay the evidence of his choice, his bruised and bandaged face, the foreclosure notice, and a billionaire's business card that promised everything or nothing, depending on whether miracles were real or just another kind of trap. The black sedan arrived at Darius's house. clean and quiet against the backdrop of South Harbor's cracked sidewalks. Darius had been awake for hours, sitting on his mother's porch and watching the sunrise paint the harbor gold, while his ribs ached and his split eyebrow throbbed. The driver was polite but professional, opening the rear door without comment about Darius's bruised face or the borrowed dress shirt that hung loose on his frame. Renata had pressed it into his hands that morning, one of their father's old shirts that still smelled faintly of aftershave and Sunday services. "You sure about this?" she'd asked, smoothing the collar with nervous fingers. "No," Darius had answered honestly, "but I'm going anyway." Now, as the sedan glided through Atlanta traffic toward downtown, Darius studied his reflection in the tinted window. The bandage over his eyebrow made him look like what he was, a man who'd been in a fight. His jaw carried a purple bruise that no amount of concealer could hide. He wondered what Vivian Langford's associates would think when they saw him walking into their gleaming world, looking like trouble. Langford Tower rose into the Atlanta sky, all glass and steel and quiet money. The lobby felt like a cathedral with marble floors that reflected the morning light, and security guards who nodded respectfully as Darius passed. He gave his name at the reception desk, and a young woman with a kind smile directed him to the executive elevator. His reflection multiplied in the polished walls as the elevator climbed. Floors of success, of decisions made in boardrooms, of problems solved with phone calls and wire transfers. Darius had spent his adult life in military bases and security checkpoints, places where function mattered more than appearance. This felt like walking into a different country. The elevator opened onto a quiet hallway, lined with original artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows that showed Atlanta sprawling in all directions. A receptionist led him past offices where people in expensive suits spoke in measured tones about quarterly reports and strategic initiatives. Vivian Langford's office occupied a corner of the building with windows facing both east and south. She sat behind a desk that looked more like a piece of art than furniture, but when she saw Darius, she rolled her wheelchair around to greet him in the open space near the windows. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, and her voice carried the same quiet strength he remembered from the diner. "Thank you for coming." She looked different here in her element, not diminished by the wheelchair or the plain clothes, but revealed. Her silver hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a navy blue suit that spoke of boardrooms and big decisions. Yet her eyes held the same warmth and pain he'd seen when Officer Harlan had covered her mouth. "Mrs. Langford," Darius replied, suddenly aware of how his borrowed shirt pulled across his shoulders and how his work boots sounded against her polished floor. She gestured toward a seating area near the windows. Comfortable chairs arranged around a low table, nothing that screamed power or intimidation. As they settled in, Vivian poured coffee from a thermal carafe, her movements precise despite the slight tremor in her hands. "How are your injuries?" she asked, studying the bandage over his eyebrow. "Healing, ma'am. Nothing serious." "Mr. Whitaker," she said, setting down her coffee cup with a gentle clink. "I want you to understand something from the start. What happened at Ruby's Diner is not an embarrassment to me. It's not something I want to minimize or forget. It's the reason you're here." Darius shifted in his chair, uncertain how to respond. "Ma'am, those officers assumed I was powerless because I'm old, black, and disabled. They assumed I was alone because I wasn't wearing expensive clothes or traveling with an entourage. They were wrong about my circumstances, but they were right about something else. Without you, I would have been powerless in that moment." She turned her wheelchair slightly to face the windows, where Atlanta stretched toward the horizon in a maze of highways and neighborhoods. Langford Mobility Systems didn't start in a boardroom like this. It started in a garage years ago, after my husband Marcus was crushed by a forklift at the textile plant where he worked. Darius listened without speaking, recognizing the weight of memory in her voice. The accident left him paralyzed from the chest down. Our insurance company approved the cheapest wheelchair they could find, a piece of junk that broke down every few weeks. They denied coverage for a wheelchair-accessible vehicle, denied coverage for home modifications, denied coverage for the equipment that might have given him some independence. Vivian's hands tightened on her coffee cup. Marcus was a proud man. He'd worked since he was young. Suddenly, he couldn't reach his own kitchen cabinets or get into his own bathroom without help. The insurance company told us he should be grateful for what they were willing to provide. She turned back to face Darius. So I learned to build what he needed. I bought tools and studied engineering manuals and failed many times before I succeeded once. The first wheelchair lift I built looked like something from a junkyard, but it worked. Marcus could get in and out of our house by himself. What happened to him? Darius asked gently. He died, pneumonia, but in those years, he had his dignity back, and I had discovered something about myself I never knew existed. She gestured toward the windows and the city beyond. I built this company piece by piece, invention by invention, because I learned that dignity isn't something insurance companies provide. It's something people create for each other. Vivian rolled closer to the table between them. The Langford Dignity Project isn't charity, Mr. Whitaker. It's investment in the kind of community I wish had existed when Marcus needed help. She opened a folder and spread several documents across the table. Darius saw architectural drawings, budget projections, legal frameworks, and staffing plans, legal aid for families facing illegal evictions, emergency grants for disabled residents who need home modifications, safe transportation for elderly people who've been targeted for harassment, job training and placement for veterans transitioning to civilian life, and most importantly, a network of community advocates who can respond when vulnerable people are being mistreated. Darius studied the papers, seeing careful planning in every detail. This is extensive. It has to be. Systematic problems require systematic solutions. Vivian leaned forward. I want you to serve as the founding director of this initiative, not as a figurehead, not as someone grateful for rescue, but as a leader with full authority to build something that lasts. The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge he wasn't sure he could cross. Darius thought about the foreclosure notice on his kitchen table, about Renata's tears, about Quincy's frightened face at the screen door. Mrs. Langford, he said carefully, I appreciate what you're offering, but I need to be honest. I'm not a businessman. I'm not educated the way your other employees probably are. I'm just a soldier trying to keep his family housed. Mr. Whitaker, she replied, and her voice carried the same authority he'd heard her use with the police officers. At Ruby's diner, 2 armed men were humiliating and silencing an elderly disabled woman. You could have walked away. You could have called someone else to handle it. Instead, you absorbed their violence rather than let them reach me again. She tapped one of the documents with her finger. That kind of restraint under pressure isn't common. That kind of moral clarity isn't something I can teach or buy. And that combination of physical courage and emotional discipline is exactly what this project needs. Darius looked out at Atlanta's skyline, thinking about all the people in all those buildings who made decisions about other people's lives every day. You're sure about this? I've spent years learning to recognize character, Mr. Whitaker. You showed me exactly who you are. Vivian reached into the folder and withdrew a single-page contract. I'm offering you a consulting agreement to start. Full salary, medical benefits, housing allowance, and complete authority to hire your initial team. If the pilot program succeeds, we'll discuss a permanent position with equity in the foundation. Darius read the salary figure, certain he'd misunderstood. It was more money than he'd made in years of security work. This is too much, he said quietly. It's exactly what the position is worth, Vivian replied. I'm not paying you for gratitude, Mr. Whitaker. I'm investing in results. Darius picked up the pen she'd placed beside the contract. His hand shook slightly as he signed his name on the signature line, making a commitment that felt like stepping off a cliff into uncertain air. Thank you, he said, setting down the pen. Don't thank me yet, Vivian replied with a small smile. Wait until you see what we're up against. In a conference room below them, members of the Langford Foundation board were already drafting an emergency meeting agenda, their phones buzzing with calls from reporters. But in Vivian's office, with Atlanta spreading beneath the windows like a promise of possibility, Darius Whitaker allowed himself to believe that sometimes courage was rewarded and that good people didn't always finish last. That afternoon, Darius drove his old Honda back to South Harbor with Vivian's signed contract folded carefully in his jacket pocket. The money felt surreal, like something that might disappear if he examined it too closely. But before he went home to tell Renata and Quincy the news, he had one stop to make. Ruby's diner looked different in the daylight. The morning rush had ended, leaving only a few regulars nursing coffee and reading newspapers. The booth where he'd fought the officers had been repaired, but Darius could still see faint scuff marks on the linoleum. Lila stood behind the counter, refilling salt shakers with mechanical precision. When she saw Darius enter, her face brightened with relief, and something that looked like gratitude. Mr. Whitaker, she said, glancing quickly toward the kitchen where the manager was probably listening. How are you feeling? Better, Darius replied, touching the bandage over his eyebrow. I wanted to thank you for speaking up. That took courage. Lila's hands stilled on the salt shaker. My father was disabled. Stroke left him in a wheelchair. One time, police officers thought he was drunk when he was really having a medication reaction. They treated him like he was less than human. She looked around the empty diner, then leaned closer. I swore I would never look away again when someone needed help. That's why I kept recording even when they told me to stop. Darius's pulse quickened. You have footage. From when they first approached Mrs. Langford until after the fighting stopped. You can see everything. Officer Harlan putting his hand over her mouth. Officer Sykes hitting you first. You never threw a punch until they were trying to hurt her. She showed him the phone screen and Darius watched the terrible scene play out. There was Vivian, dignified and calm, showing her receipt. There were the officers, aggressive and mocking. There was the moment when Harlan covered her mouth and Sykes laughed about nobody coming to save her. And there was Darius stepping forward, not in anger, but in protection, taking blow after blow rather than letting either officer reach Vivian again. This proves everything, Darius said, amazed. I know. Lila glanced toward the kitchen again. But Mr. Denning won't let me give it to anyone official. He says the diner can't get involved in police business. As if summoned by her words, the manager emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a stained apron. He was a thin man with nervous eyes, and the defeated posture of someone who'd spent years bending to stronger wills. Mr. Whitaker, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I heard you were looking for our security footage. Yes, sir. It would help clear up what happened. The manager shook his head quickly. I'm sorry, but our cameras weren't working properly. Technical malfunction. Nothing recorded. Darius studied the man's face, seeing fear rather than deception. The manager was lying, but not from malice. He was terrified. Mr. Denning, Darius said gently. Mrs. Langford was being abused by those officers. You saw it yourself. I saw a disturbance, the manager replied, his words sounding rehearsed. I saw raised voices and some pushing. These things happen. Best to let it go. Lila stared at her manager with obvious disappointment. You know that's not what happened. Focus on your work, the manager said sharply. Customers don't come here for drama. Darius felt the familiar weight of institutional silence, the same pattern that had protected bad officers and abandoned good soldiers throughout his military career. But this time, he had Vivian's resources behind him and Lila's courage beside him. I understand, Darius said to the manager. Thank you for your time. He left a tip for Lila and walked outside into the humid afternoon air. Moments later, Lila appeared at the diner's side door, looking around nervously before approaching him. I can't give this to you officially, she said, pulling out her phone again. But I can send it to myself, and then accidentally send it to the wrong number. She showed him her contact screen, and Darius quietly recited his phone number. Within seconds, his phone buzzed with an incoming video file. Thank you, he said. Lila immediately deleted the message from her sent folder and cleared her phone's recent call log. My shift ends soon. After that, I don't know anything about any video. You're risking your job for this. Some things are worth the risk, Lila replied. My father used to say that silence in the face of cruelty makes you part of the cruelty. Later, Darius sat in his Honda outside his house, showing Renata the video on his phone screen. She watched in horrified silence. Oh my God, Renata whispered when it ended. They were torturing her. Now you understand why I couldn't walk away. Renata wiped tears from her eyes. I thought you were being reckless. I thought you were risking our family for pride. But that woman, she needed you. That evening, as Darius prepared dinner and told Quincy about the new job opportunity, Lila received a text message from an unknown number. Your services are no longer needed at Ruby's Diner. Do not return to work. Final paycheck will be mailed. And in the manager's small apartment above the diner, Victor Langston sat across from the frightened manager, sliding a typed statement across the kitchen table. Just sign it. Your lease renewal depends on keeping this simple. Mr. Whitaker became aggressive. The officers responded appropriately, and everyone wants to move on. Clean and easy. The manager's hand trembled as he signed the false statement condemning the man who had tried to protect an innocent woman. The next morning, Darius walked into Langford Tower carrying two pieces of evidence that felt like weapons in his jacket pocket. Lila's video proved the officer's cruelty. The manager's false statement proved the cover-up. Together, they painted a picture of coordinated harassment that went far beyond one bad encounter. Denise Holloway met him in the lobby, her sharp suit and confident stride making other visitors step aside instinctively. She led him to a conference room where Vivian sat reviewing documents, her reading glasses perched on her nose, and her expression growing darker by the minute. "Show her the video first," Denise said without preamble. Darius placed his phone on the table, and the three of them watched Lila's footage in silence. Even though Vivian had lived through the encounter, seeing it from an outside perspective seemed to affect her deeply. When Officer Harlan covered her mouth, she unconsciously touched her own lips. "That's assault," Denise said when it ended. "Clear documentation of excessive force and civil rights violations." "Now the other piece," Darius said, unfolding the manager's statement. Vivian read aloud the lies. "Every word is a lie," Denise observed, "but it shows coordination. Someone coached him on the language." She opened her laptop and pulled up a development proposal document. "The South Harbor project is being spearheaded by Victor Langston. He's the principal investor." Darius leaned forward, recognizing the name from the buyout letters. "He's been sending offers to homeowners in my neighborhood, insulting amounts of money with pressure tactics. It gets worse," Denise continued, scrolling through the proposal. "They're using disability rights terminology to market luxury development." Vivian's face flushed with anger. They approached the Langford Foundation asking for a major donation. They said it was about helping elderly and disabled residents age in place with better resources, while simultaneously forcing those same residents out through harassment. Darius felt pieces clicking together in his mind. The officers knew about an investor tour. They were clearing out people they thought looked bad for business. Mrs. Altha on my block got cited for keeping her wheelchair ramp because it supposedly violated setback requirements. Denise made notes rapidly. "We need to document every instance of harassment, every suspicious code violation, every intimidation tactic. If we can prove systematic targeting of vulnerable residents to benefit Langston's project, we have grounds for a federal civil rights investigation." She pulled up a spreadsheet. "I've already identified multiple cases." Vivian coughed slightly, covering her mouth with her hand. Darius noticed the way she shifted in her wheelchair, trying to hide discomfort. "Mrs. Langford, are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," she replied. But Darius caught the flash of pain in her eyes. "Fighting this kind of systematic abuse takes energy. I'm not sure I have any more." Denise looked up with concern. "Your doctor said to avoid stress." "My doctor doesn't understand that some things are worth the risk," Vivian replied firmly, though her voice carried an edge of fatigue. "Victor Langston tried to use my foundation's reputation to legitimize stealing people's homes. That makes this personal." She straightened in her chair, summoning renewed determination. "The city council hearing for project approval is scheduled. If residents testify about the harassment, if we can prove the connection between police intimidation and development interests, we can stop this. The challenge is getting people to speak up," Darius said. "Everyone's afraid of retaliation. We need a safe space for them to organize first." Denise agreed. "Somewhere the community trusts." Darius thought of the small church where his mother had taken him as a boy. Reverend Samuel Price has been serving South Harbor for years. If anyone can bring people together, it's him. Vivian nodded slowly. "Then we start there." Denise was already reaching for her phone. "I'll call Reverend Price now and ask about hosting a community meeting. People need to know what they're really fighting." That evening, rain drummed steadily against the tall windows of Reverend Samuel Price's church as neighbors filed quietly into the basement meeting room. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across folding chairs arranged in a loose circle, and the smell of old coffee lingered in the air. Darius sat near the front with Vivian, whose wheelchair was positioned where everyone could see her clearly. Denise had her laptop open, ready to document everything. Renata held Quincy's hand in the back row. Lila sat quietly near the door. Reverend Price, a tall man with silver hair and gentle eyes, stood to address the gathering. "Before we begin, I want everyone to know this is sacred ground. What's spoken here stays here, until you decide otherwise. We're here because our community is under attack, and silence only helps those who want to hurt us." The first person to speak was a thin woman in her 70s who clutched her purse tightly. "Weeks ago, 2 officers came to my door early in the morning. They said neighbors complained about my medical alert device being too loud. But I live alone and that device is the only way I can call for help if I fall. How many complaints? Denise asked. Several, all after I refused to sell to that development company. Murmurs rippled through the room. Darius watched faces transform from fear to recognition. These weren't isolated incidents. A middle-aged man whose leg had been amputated wheeled himself forward. They ticketed my van for commercial vehicle storage in my own driveway, the van I need to get to medical appointments. When I asked which neighbor complained, they couldn't give me a name. More hands went up, more stories poured out. Sudden property inspections that found violations no one had noticed before. Police showing up during family gatherings, claiming noise complaints. Code enforcement officers measuring ramps and lifts, looking for technical violations. Lila finally stood, her hands shaking slightly. Some of you might not believe all this is connected, but I have something to show you. She pulled out her phone and played the video from Ruby's diner. The room fell silent. When the video ended, the silence stretched. Then the woman began to cry. Not from fear, but from relief. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought maybe I was imagining the harassment because I'm old. You're not imagining anything, Vivian said firmly, her voice carrying across the room. What you've experienced is systematic intimidation, designed to force you out of homes you have every right to keep. She gestured to Denise, who pulled up the development proposal. The man behind this harassment is Victor Langston. He's using police pressure and code enforcement to clear the neighborhood for luxury development. He even approached my foundation for funding, claiming the project would help elderly and disabled residents. Anger began to replace fear in the room. People sat up straighter. Voices grew stronger. What can we do? Asked a woman whose family had faced repeated inspections. We fight back legally, Denise replied. Document everything. Record interactions with police and code enforcement. Save all correspondence from the company. The city council votes on project approval, and we're going to make sure they hear the truth. Vivian leaned forward in her wheelchair. I'm also establishing an emergency fund. Any family facing displacement, eviction, or harassment-related expenses can apply for immediate assistance. No one should lose their home while we fight this battle. She turned to look at Darius. And I'm authorizing an advance on your consulting contract so you can make your foreclosure payment. Darius felt his throat tighten with emotion. After months of sleepless nights and impossible choices, salvation felt almost too good to believe. Renata walked over, her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I was so scared of losing everything that I couldn't see you were trying to save everything. What you did at that diner, protecting her when she couldn't protect herself, that's who you've always been. Quincy hugged his uncle's leg. Are we going to be okay now? Yeah, buddy, Darius said, ruffling the boy's hair. We're going to be just fine. After the meeting ended, Darius sat in Reverend Price's small office, using the church computer to make the bank payment online. His fingers trembled slightly as he entered the routing numbers and confirmed the transfer. When the confirmation screen appeared, he stared at it, hardly believing the house was safe. For the first time in months, hope felt larger than fear. Later, Denise's voice was tight with controlled anger on the phone. The video is gone. It disappeared. Her phone backup was wiped remotely, and the foundation board just sent an emergency email. They're suspending the Dignity Project pending review of potential legal liabilities. Before sunrise, Darius sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands. The foreclosure notice was gone, replaced by printouts of emails that had arrived. Each message felt like a punch to the gut. Renata emerged from the bedroom in her scrubs. She picked up the papers and read them quietly, her face growing pale. The Langford Foundation is suspending your contract, effective immediately. Darius nodded. There's more. The security company withdrew their job offer. Something about character concerns. Renata sank into the chair. How did they find out so fast? Someone's making sure everyone knows. His phone buzzed with a text from his old supervisor. License under review. Don't come in. Quincy wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. Uncle Darius, why do you look sad? Just tired, buddy. Go get ready for school. Soon, Lila stood in their living room, with tears streaming down her face, and a legal document clutched in her shaking hand. They fired me. They said I violated company policy by recording customers without permission. But that's not the worst part. She held up the papers. Langston Development sent me this. They're threatening to sue me for defamation and invasion of privacy if I share that video with anyone else. They say I damaged the reputation of law enforcement officers in the line of duty. Darius took the document and scanned it. The legal language was intimidating, designed to frighten. This is garbage. You were protecting someone from assault. Try telling that to my landlord when I can't make rent. Or to the lawyer they said they'd hire to destroy my life if I don't keep quiet. Renata brought Lila a cup of tea. What about the backup? Gone. My phone, my cloud account, everything. They got into it somehow and wiped it all. It's like that video never existed. Darius's phone rang. They're moving fast, Denise said. Someone compromised the accounts. We can't prove it quickly enough to matter. What about Vivian? Her board is panicking. Stock dropped after rumors. They're pressuring her to distance herself, and her doctor ordered complete bed rest. Her blood pressure spiked. She's not taking calls. By noon, the retaliation had spread across the internet. A local news blog published an article titled, "Decorated Veteran Loses Control in Diner Confrontation." The piece quoted Officer Harlan extensively, describing Darius as aggressive and unpredictable. It mentioned his military service, but framed his SEAL training as making him dangerous rather than disciplined. The article included no quotes from witnesses and made no mention of Vivian being silenced or abused. Instead, it painted her as a confused elderly woman. Darius read the comments section once, then closed his laptop. Half the readers called him a hero, the other half called him a thug. Neither group knew the whole truth. That afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled up outside the house. Darius watched from behind the curtain as Victor Langston stepped out, straightening his expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. The developer's silver hair was perfectly styled, and his smile looked practiced as he approached the front porch. Darius opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Whitaker," Victor said warmly, extending his hand. "I was hoping we could talk." Darius didn't take the offered handshake. "About what?" "About your future." "May I come in?" "No." Victor's smile never wavered. "I understand you're going through a difficult time. False accusations, job troubles, financial pressure. It's a shame when good people get caught up in misunderstandings. Is there a point to this?" Victor opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "There is, actually. I've been authorized to make you a very generous offer." He held out a check for more money than Darius had earned in years. "This is a relocation assistance payment, enough to buy your family a beautiful home in a safer neighborhood, with money left over for your nephew's future." Renata appeared in the doorway. Victor's eyes shifted to her with calculated sympathy. "I understand you work very hard to provide for your son. This money could give him opportunities you've only dreamed of." "What's the catch?" Renata asked quietly. Victor pulled out another document. "Just a simple agreement acknowledging that the incident at Ruby's Diner was a misunderstanding, that you realized the officers were doing their jobs, and that emotions ran high on all sides. A non-disclosure agreement." "A fresh start," Victor corrected. "For all of you." Darius looked at the check again. It represented everything they needed. Security, safety, a future for Quincy. All he had to do was lie about what he saw, abandon the woman who tried to help him, and let Victor destroy the neighborhood his mother loved. He took the papers, looked at them for a long moment, then tore them in half. "My mother's house isn't for sale, and neither is my integrity." That same evening, Darius stood in his mother's bedroom, with a worn duffel bag spread open on the faded quilt. He folded his few good shirts with military precision, each crease sharp and purposeful. The movement felt familiar, like preparing for deployment, except this time, he was retreating. "What are you doing?" Renata's voice cut through the quiet room like a blade. Darius didn't turn around. "There's a construction crew that needs security. Cash work. You're running." The words hit hard. "I'm protecting you by abandoning us." Now he turned. Renata stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, still wearing her nursing scrubs. Her eyes were red with exhaustion and disappointment. "Look around, Renata. I've lost my job, my security license, my future with the foundation. Lila got fired because she helped me. Everyone who stands with me gets hurt, so you're going to let them win. I'm going to keep you and Quincy safe by being smart for once, instead of stubborn." Darius grabbed another shirt, trying to keep his hands busy so they wouldn't shake. "You said it yourself. Miracles don't happen for people like us." "I should have listened." Renata stepped into the room, her voice rising. "People like us, What does that mean? It means we don't have lawyers and bodyguards and big foundations to protect us when we stand up to power. It means when we get knocked down, we stay down, because getting back up just makes them hit us harder. That's not what Mama taught you. Mama died leaving us a house we can't afford to keep. Darius snapped, then immediately regretted the words. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Renata's voice went quiet, which was somehow worse than her anger. And maybe you're right. Maybe she was foolish to believe dignity mattered more than survival. The silence stretched between them, filled with years of struggle and sacrifice. Uncle Darius. They turned to find Quincy standing in the hallway holding something in his small hands. I found this in Grandma's Bible. It has your name on it. Darius took the envelope with trembling fingers. His mother's handwriting spelled out his name. The paper was yellowed. When did she write this? Renata asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Darius opened the letter carefully. My dearest son, the letter began in her familiar voice. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are facing a choice about this old house. I know you will be tempted to think of it as just property, something to sell or lose or fight over, but it was never meant to be an asset, baby. It was meant to be shelter. Your daddy and I bought this place with nothing but hope and stubbornness. We painted every room ourselves, fixed every broken thing, and opened our door to anyone who needed dignity more than they needed privacy. This house fed hungry children, housed broken families, and sheltered dreams that had nowhere else to grow. I am not leaving you walls and a roof. Son, I am leaving you a responsibility to be shelter for others, the way this house was shelter for us. Not because it is easy or profitable, but because it is right. The letter went on, but Darius had to stop reading. His chest felt too tight, and the words blurred through tears. She knew, Renata whispered. She knew this day would come. Darius wiped his eyes and kept reading. I know my death will bring financial hardship. I know you will be tempted to see this house as a burden, but remember what I taught you about burdens, baby. They are only heavy when you carry them alone. The neighborhood needs leaders who understand that protecting home means protecting everyone's home, not just your own. Do not let them divide you from your people. Do not let them make you believe that survival requires abandoning others. That is the lie that keeps poor folks poor and good people powerless. The house is yours now, but it belongs to anyone who needs it. Make me proud. All my love, Mama. Quincy snuggled closer. What does it mean, Uncle Darius? Darius folded the letter carefully and looked around the room. It means the house was never just about us. It was about everyone who needed a place to belong. Renata stood up and walked to the duffel bag. She started pulling out the clothes, shaking them out and hanging them back in the closet. What are you doing? Darius asked. Unpacking. You're not running away, and neither am I. Tomorrow morning we're going to that city council hearing. All three of us. They'll destroy us. Maybe. But Mama's right. We can't protect this house by abandoning everyone else who's fighting for theirs. Darius's phone buzzed with a text from Denise. Board meeting went badly. Vivian may not be able to attend. You may be testifying alone. He showed the message to Renata. Instead, she walked to the closet and pulled out his old navy dress jacket. Then we better make sure you look like the man she believed you could become. The South Harbor City Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as residents filled every seat. Darius adjusted his navy dress jacket and tried to ignore the pain from his bruised ribs. Renata sat in the front row with Quincy, her face set with determination. Behind them, Lila clutched a folder of witness statements, while Reverend Price nodded encouragingly. Victor Langston stood at the podium in an expensive suit, his presentation screen glowing with beautiful images of parks, modern apartments, medical offices, tree-lined sidewalks. The South Harbor Project represents a forward-thinking approach to community development. We're not just building housing, we're creating an inclusive neighborhood where seniors, disabled residents, and working families can thrive together. This project will bring jobs, increase property values, and provide the accessibility features this community has needed for decades. We're partnering with medical providers, transportation services, and disability advocacy groups to ensure no one is left behind. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some residents looked tempted by the promises. Others shifted uncomfortably. When Victor finished, the mayor called Darius's name. He walked to the microphone slowly. My name is Darius Whitaker. I'm a Navy veteran, and I live in the house my mother left me. He paused, looking out at faces both familiar and strange. I watched two police officers humiliate an elderly black woman at Ruby's diner. They covered her mouth with their hands. They mocked her disability. They told her nobody was coming to save her. I intervened because that woman reminded me of my mother, my sister, my neighbors, people who deserve dignity, whether they own property or not, whether they have money or not, whether they fit someone's vision of progress or not. Victor's attorney leaned forward to whisper something. But what happened at that diner wasn't random. For a long time, elderly residents have been ticketed for sitting outside their own homes. Disabled neighbors have been told their ramps violate building codes. Families have received sudden inspections after refusing to sell their houses. The attorney stood up. Your Honor, Mr. Whitaker was involved in a violent altercation with police officers. His testimony is clearly motivated by anger and desperation. I was defending someone who couldn't defend herself, Darius interrupted calmly. Just like I'm defending neighbors who can't defend themselves against intimidation and harassment. The chamber stirred as Officer Harlan entered. Several residents looked down. Darius noticed the fear. Sir, he said, looking directly at an elderly resident. Did you want to speak? The man tried to stand, but his hands shook as he gripped his walker. Darius stepped away from the podium and walked down the aisle. Take your time. We're all here with you. The room fell completely silent as the man slowly made his way to the microphone, leaning on both his walker and Darius's steady presence. His voice was quiet but clear. They ticketed me for sitting outside my own home. The elderly man's courage rippled through the chamber. A woman in scrubs stood up. Last month I was helping an elderly resident get off the bus when Officer Sykes told us we were blocking traffic. She uses a walker and moves slowly, but he wouldn't wait. He grabbed her arm and pulled her. She fell. Another hand rose, then another. A man in a maintenance uniform stood. They gave me a ticket for parking in front of my own house. I've lived there for years. Lila walked to the microphone. I recorded what happened at Ruby's diner. Officer Sykes hit Mr. Whitaker first. Mr. Whitaker only fought to protect Mrs. Langford. I was fired the next day. Renata rose from her seat. I'm Renata Reed, Darius's sister. My family lives in his mother's house. Every week, more families leave our neighborhood because they're scared of tickets they can't pay. Inspections that find problems that were never problems before. Police who treat sitting on your own porch like a crime. Victor's attorney shot to her feet. These are emotional accusations without evidence. The chamber doors opened. Every head turned as Vivian Langford entered in her wheelchair with Denise walking beside her. Vivian moved slowly down the center aisle. When she reached the front, Denise helped position her wheelchair near the microphone. My name is Vivian Langford. I am the founder and majority owner of Langford Mobility Systems. A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. I sat in Ruby's diner waiting for my transportation. I was wearing ordinary clothes because I wanted to see how this community treats its most vulnerable residents when no cameras are watching, no reporters are present, and no reward is expected. Vivian's fingers moved to the small pendant at her throat. This device records audio for legal protection. Everything that happened at Ruby's diner was preserved. The chamber erupted. Victor's attorney stood up again, her face pale. Denise stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the table. The metadata has been verified. The recording is authentic and legally admissible. Vivian's voice cut through the noise. Furthermore, Langford Mobility Systems is immediately withdrawing all consideration from Mr. Langston's development proposal. Instead, I am establishing a major community trust controlled by residents themselves with Mr. Whitaker as the founding director. Victor's polished smile collapsed. Reporters rushed forward while Officers Harlan and Sykes were quietly escorted out. The morning sun caught the brass nameplate as Darius turned the key in the glass doors of the Langford Dignity Center. 1 year had passed since the city council hearing that changed everything. Where Victor Langston once planned luxury apartments, a converted warehouse now housed offices, meeting rooms, a legal clinic, and a workshop where veterans built wheelchair ramps. The investigation that followed had peeled back layers of corruption. Text messages revealed coordination. Bank records showed payments. The manager admitted under oath that he'd been pressured, and within weeks he'd sold Ruby's diner to a cooperative of longtime employees. Lila walked through the center's front doors as outreach coordinator, connecting families with emergency housing funds, disability advocates, and legal aid. The nervous waitress who once feared speaking up now testified at hearings about police accountability. Morning, Lila, Darius said, adjusting his tie. The executive director position still felt surreal some days, but the work felt right. Veterans on his staff escorted seniors to medical appointments, repaired broken ramps, and provided safe transportation for disabled residents who'd been ignored for too long. Mrs. Washington called about her heating bill, and the nursing school wants to schedule another visit. Renata was thriving in the program, supported by a foundation scholarship. Quincy often came to the center after school, helping and learning that service looked like showing up every day. Vivian's coming for lunch. She wants to discuss the expansion. When Vivian had first offered him a job, she'd thought she was rescuing one man. Instead, he'd proven that an entire community deserved power over their own lives. The trust operated with residents holding board seats, veterans leading programs, and seniors setting priorities. Dignity wasn't charity, it was justice. At noon, Darius walked to Ruby's diner, now brighter and busier than ever. The cooperative had installed new booths and added a community bulletin board. The same space where Darius had once counted coins for toast now served free lunch to seniors. Vivian sat near the window in her wheelchair, reading reports while waiting for him. Her silver hair caught the light, and her dark eyes held the satisfaction of someone whose wealth finally served her values. "How's the expansion looking?" Darius asked, sliding into the booth. "More cities want to replicate the model. Turns out people everywhere are tired of being pushed around." Through the window, Darius spotted Quincy walking home from school. The boy paused when he saw an elderly man struggling with a broken walker. Isaiah knelt beside the man, examining the bent wheel with careful attention. Then he offered his arm. "Let me help you to the bus stop, sir. You're not alone." Vivian followed Darius's gaze and smiled from her wheelchair, watching the circle complete itself in the bright afternoon sun. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.